The US, which has made policies which has made it very difficult for new vaccines to be sold there. That's where we were going. With the aid being cut by Elon Musk, and thank God he's now gone. Children's lives are at stake here.
Yeah.
If they don't get the funding, you can't vaccinate these countries with all the childhood vaccines that they need to take.
COVID is back in the headlines. I want to take you back to those years. I don't think it's said often enough that you were a real hero of the time.
The biggest risk was not financial, it was reputational. Our credibility, my personal credibility was at stake.
What does money mean to you?
Look, you can't take whatever amount of money you have up to heaven when you die. You can give something to your children, they'll have plenty.
If you have like a kind of unfinished dream.
The ultimate dream is to have
Adar, COVID is back in the headlines, though thankfully in not as dreadful a way as our memories take us back to 2020 and 2021. But given that COVID is back in the headlines, I want to take you back to those years when you basically took a punt on the vaccine, a vaccine that a majority of Indians used as our defense against COVID. I think not many people know how big a risk you took at the time, how tough a decision it must have been for you, and what made you do it. So I want you to take us back to those years.
Well, Barkha, the thinking at that time was I didn't want to have any regrets going forward, that I had the ability and capability to act and do something to protect our nation and the world at large, given our expertise and huge manufacturing capabilities. Now, the risk at that time was, as you very well put it, it was a very calculated risk. And the biggest risk was not financial, it was reputational. Our credibility, my personal credibility was at stake, that if I failed or couldn't deliver, on the promises, that would haunt me later on. So I had to be very, very careful on what I said, what I did, the execution, raising the money, partnering with the right people. So that was the thinking behind it. And, touch wood, everything eventually, worked itself out with all the ups and downs.
But before we got to the eventually, were there many sleepless nights? Like I remember being in touch with you pretty regularly in those months because I was out there telling the COVID story. And I remember once you told me that, you were just like, I've taken this risk and now I have to deliver. And sometimes I'm like, grappling with this anxiety, what if I fail? So how did you deal with those voices in your head?
Well, for the first time, I really felt the stress an entrepreneur goes through.
Yeah.
The risk of failure, because until then we were a steady ship. We were doing our business, regular business. At one point, I did feel that I may have gotten in a little bit over, ahead of myself and a little took on challenges that I might not be able to deliver. But, what I did was I just compartmentalized what I had to achieve on that day and just didn't think about what I had to do the next day. Otherwise, I'd have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
So there were, of course, sleepless nights and things now a lot more relaxed. And I think, it's very important for every entrepreneur or businessman or anyone who wants to do anything in life that you do take that chance where you face unsurmountable odds and you face the challenges and you deal with everything that comes along. And I think I'm stronger for it. I learned a lot. I never went and did a master's. So, I what I learned in those 2 years, dealing with the government, the media, executing these large projects, raising capital, which I'd never had to do before. So I sort of educated myself and I got a crash course in those 2 years. That was my MBA, I would think, and and came out doing okay. So now we're very relaxed and looking
I want to say that I don't think it's said often enough that you were a real hero of the time. And I'll tell you why I say it. Because you didn't have to do this vaccine.
Yes.
And I think that's what people don't understand. It was not like a commercially motivated decision. Serum was already producing more than 60% of the world's vaccines. You did not have to do it. Nobody asked you to do it. It was like you yourself taking this risk and doing it. And when you look back at that moment, and I think I remember talking to you then, and you said you were driving to work where we're sitting right now, and it just came to you that you've got to do this. What was that? What was that voice inside you? Why did you do it?
Well, I mean, look, I'm a second generation, and there's always this pressure to prove yourself. But one doesn't want to make a mistake in doing that. Sometimes you get ahead of yourself. I just wanted to do what I thought was morally responsible. And as I said, this was my moment to try and perform and show that I'm not just sitting in a very comfortable position. The easiest thing for me was to just do nothing and just continue, as business as usual. But so that's what was
How
the
did it
turning
change
point.
you? You must have been like a pretty chilled business tycoon before that. And here, this was baptism by fire.
Yes, because I was working till 11 at night, which
Yeah.
I'd never done before.
No work-life balance, huh?
No. And that I was genuinely doing what certain people had mentioned, working 16, 17 hours a day. So I think it definitely made me a little more independent and resilient. I gained a lot of confidence on the kind of decisions that now even I'm making going forward. So it really educated me and made me a little more resilient toward the challenges in the future. Now, when a challenge comes up, it's nothing compared to what I went through. So it's really helped me in that sense work with all the kinds of different uncertainties. Now you've got the US, which has made policies which have made it very difficult for new vaccines to be sold there. That's where we were going. With the aid being cut by Elon Musk, and thank God he's now gone, because what was happening is that a lot of these African countries and other nations and institutions like Gavi and WHO were dependent to a certain extent, but they've obviously secured funding from other countries. Children's lives are at stake here. If they don't get the funding, you can't vaccinate these countries with all the childhood vaccines that they need to take. So these are the challenges we're facing right now. But of course, compared to COVID, it was very different.
Yeah, I'll come to the Trump years in a moment. But did you ever, in that period of COVID, feel like I shouldn't have taken this on?
There were some moments, but then once you're in it, then you have to come out the other end. Otherwise, there's no turning back. There was a point of no return. So once you had announced that you're going to do it, then you have to go ahead at whatever cost and just get that done. And, the government was also very supportive in trying to get permissions and things in record time, which we hope we can continue even today.
Let's talk about today.
Yeah.
As I said, COVID is back, not in that way that it paralyzes us. But it's back. And what we do know is that this is a virus that mutates and there are new variants. And what does that do in terms of vaccine production? You might have people now asking you all over again.
No, so that's very interesting. A lot of people have been asking me.
Like random strangers?
Yes. And, so there's a funny thing right now. There's a policy that allows pharmaceutical drugs. There's a list of drugs where if you've done trials or trials have been conducted on those products in the US, in Europe, any of the regulated markets, India will not mandate a trial to be done as well, and you can get a license. What my plea now probably will be with the government, we've already written to them, is that allow this for vaccines as well. Because, for example, we have the JN1 strain here.
Yeah.
We're licensed in the US. This is the Novavax vaccine, which was Covavax, if you remember. And this can be given to people in India if we just have this rule where, if you've done trials in the US and you're licensed, but in a proper regulated country, then you should be allowed to give the vaccine, in India.
So are you saying that
So otherwise what would happen is that if we started doing again a small trial here, it would take a year and then the season would be lost. Now, COVID is somewhat like flu, whereby, the strains change and every year you need to take a shot of the flu vaccine, for example, will eventually have a COVID and flu combination vaccine. So it's just a choice. If people want to protect themselves, if you're vulnerable in that category and you want to take it. So we just need our policies to be just tweaked a little bit in India so that we can do that. And so I'm working on that.
So let me understand this properly. You're saying that Novavax, even though it has gone through its regulatory trials in the United States of America, to be brought into use in India, it would have to go through the trial.
Yes, because it's a different strain. This is not the strain that we had during COVID.
I see.
So now the strain is JN1 and the subvariants which are similar to that. So when you have a vaccine like that, which is approved in the US, we should be allowed to give it to India. And that's what I'm working with right now to answer your point. Okay, what do we do with COVID right now if it comes?
Now, you are in an unprecedented, and you alluded to, Trump, unprecedented environment in terms of an anti-vaxxer who's in government in the United States of America, right? He's a known anti-vaxxer, Mr. Kennedy, and he's the health secretary of the Trump administration. What does that do, A, to your business, but B, to the larger awareness that, people have spent so much energy building up awareness and busting myths. But now you actually have an administration that could hurt your space in two ways. One, tariffs, and two, basically creating fear around vaccines.
No, so the US is trying to do what it thinks is best for the US.
Yeah.
I respect that. I understand that. But, I fear they'll end up doing more harm than good. For instance, with the tariffs. Ultimately, the citizens in the US are going to end up paying more for everything. Because whichever companies are producing these products, whether it's pharmaceuticals or whatever else, they're not going to overnight be able to, US companies are not overnight going to be able to make it there. Even US companies today, there are, for example, the Apple example as well, that you can't just overnight shift production every sector to the US. So it's going to take time. I think tariffs is one issue, but these policies where now, for example, Mr. Kennedy has said that you have to do placebo trials, which means that you have to do vaccine trials in an arm where, the placebo arm gets nothing. Now, again, ethically to get that passed, it's very tricky because the ethics committees in these countries or any country would say that why are you depriving someone of a vaccine in one arm and the other. So placebo trials are very difficult. There's no need for it. If you want additional studies to be done to prove safety and efficacy, just do it. Especially on vaccines where, for example, there are measles cases in the United States. We have given, for example,
dying of measles
billions,
in
which is a joke. Billions of doses from our company and other companies have been provided to the world with no issues. These are just what I call artificial barriers to entry. So the US can significantly benefit with companies like us being able to provide vaccines and pharmaceutical products over there. So someone needs to relook at that. These were some of the markets that we were looking to go to now because, as you know, we're in 172 countries in Africa, India, South America, Asia. Europe and US, now is the next frontier for us to go to with our vaccines.
Yeah. So, you mentioned you're in 170 countries, and I was reminded of the fact, and correct me if I have this number wrong, that when you got involved in the Serum Institute, you were 20?
21.
21. And Serum at that time was in about 40 countries, if I'm not. So you've actually grown this from 40 to 170, which is extraordinary. But as a 21-year-old kid, stepping into this universe, I mean, what was that like? And did you always know that you were going to do this, or did you ever want to do something else?
Well, it was always my father's dream for me to come back and work with him. In fact, that's why I didn't even go for a master's. As soon as I'd finished my bachelor's degree in the UK at 21, I came back and started working with Dad. And, initially I started in the marketing department and sales.
So you had to come up the ranks?
Yes, I mean, in a sense, I only became the CEO 10 years ago in 2011. Well, now a little bit more than 10 years ago. But I'd already been working then for 10 years before I became CEO. But initially, just to share my journey, I was very interested in how we could sell our products, not only in India and widely have that distributed and penetrated in this very large country of ours, but also to grow our exports. Because I always found it's easier to grow and add countries abroad than just growing in one country. Back in the day, I remember going with my father for permissions and sitting outside bureaucrats' offices for 2 hours. I'd take a book just to read to pass
Really?
the time between.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't have, we weren't a very large group. We
Yeah.
were just very small company.
Yeah.
And I just found that a little bit, coming back from the UK and English educated,
Yeah.
I found that a little monotonous. And I just felt that why not have a go at growing exports? And back in the day, unlike today, the bureaucrats are very good. They meet you, they take action, you get permissions, and the government of India is buying a lot of vaccines and focusing on health. Now, back in the day, 20 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
So I wanted to then export and grow countries there. And I found that very easy. Every year I'd come back with 4 or 5 countries where we could appoint distributors or have agents which would, sell to the governments. And then I realized that getting more of our products qualified in terms of quality and capacity was the key. So that's when, after 5-6 years of doing that and traveling around, I focused more of my time here at Serum trying to increase capacity and convincing my father to just increase capacity ahead of time, because as the opportunities come, you don't want to be too late.
Yeah.
Now, for example, even during COVID, we had built a lot of these capacities ahead of time. People thought I was crazy, just building more capacity. If I was a listed company and a CEO of a listed company spending so much on capex and other things, I would have probably been sacked, because there was no merit or logic that way to be able to explain and present why am I doing this.
And you sold a facility to raise money.
At that time we sold a facility in Prague. We went to Bill Gates and his foundation, who generously gave us an advance, and a lot of countries who gave us advances on our vaccines. But that was a unique time. So we could raise capital that way without selling a stake in Serum and losing, flexibility and things like that. So coming back to my journey, I focused then on understanding more of the science.
So that was going to be my question. You did your bachelor's and you came back, right? How did you teach yourself the science and the medicine of it?
I spent a lot of time with the scientists on the shop floor, understanding, the guys who had built Serum with my father in the 60s and 70s. They were very kind enough to teach me, a lot of the ins and outs of how to not only produce, but then, how to become more efficient. We improved our technology. We partnered with a lot of companies to improve our yields. Because what I found every time I'd come back from countries is that we had so many orders, we just couldn't supply. And that's what motivated me to get into looking into how can we increase the manufacturing, because I'd make commitments, that here we've got all these orders and now we can't supply. So that's how I learned the entire sort of automatically the whole part of, the manufacturing, the sales. And then of course it was all about getting permissions and licenses also. So that was, dealing with the government, and that was a third area that one needs to understand living in India. And I think, once the Modi government came in, certainly there were a lot of reforms and improvements made. And even today, when we bring up some issues, they look at it, and we've got some reforms that we've suggested also right now to the government. So now health is a priority also. Back in the day, it wasn't such a big spending. We would spend on defense or space or so many other priorities that our country has, and infrastructure also that's needed. So,
what's been the toughest thing of getting from that time to now for you personally? What's been the most difficult? And COVID, I don't mean COVID, because that was a black swan moment, so to speak. But what has been personally really difficult for you to learn or unlearn? Sometimes in our lives we have to unlearn things, right? It's not even about learning.
No, I think learning what not to do and saying no to the 90% of the proposals that come your way is the key here, because you don't want to waste your time getting on the wrong train. I think my earlier days was more about proving myself to not only the people here, but also to the outside world that, look, this is not someone who's just inheriting some business from his father, but he's actually able to, grow the business, make the right partnerships, get along with people, and earning that sort of respect over time with a track record was important for me at that time. I think that was the most difficult part, because that credibility to build, it takes 20 years to do that. And I don't know if I still have that or not, but I still always keep that in the back of my mind, that that's very important.
How many hours a day do you work, or is this a
No, it
contentious
depends.
question for
No,
this
no, no, it depends.
work-life
It
balance
depends.
debate?
No, no, no. It totally depends. Now, look, a person on the shop floor has a shift of 7, 8 hours.
Yeah.
But for someone who is at a leadership position, or an executive director, or a CEO, my day could be, it could be traveling somewhere to another country to try and work out a small acquisition or a partnership. It could be dealing with, some manufacturing issues, getting some of our new facilities online. It could be looking at our, budgets of what we want to spend in capex and opex over the next few years. It could be a discussion on a new technology that we want to look at. That could take 2, 3 hours to debate and whether to get into that or not. So, it's a new day and a different day every day. There's no fixed schedule. I just take the work as it comes. People want to talk about their personal, issues. It could be anything.
Are you a stern boss?
Well, I mean, I don't tolerate, repeated mistakes or incompetence, but I'm quite generous in terms of, allowing people the freedom and empowering them to do what they want. We have a very good culture where it's an open door sort of thing. Anyone can come and talk to me about anything. I give generous budgets for them to be able to, I don't nitpick at small things.
You're not a micromanager?
No. I mean, micromanager to a certain extent, which you have to be for certain things. But now we've come to such a size, and my father was a micromanager, and I learned that from him, and that was very important, because that's when you know everything what's going on. You don't want to just sit at the top. But now we've come to a size where, it's not possible to micromanage.
And it can run itself.
So you have to empower people and allow them to also. Otherwise, it's very demotivating for people if every decision is just held at the top. But all important decisions, of course, are discussed in our main board and committee before taking it forward.
How would you say your personality for Serum has been different from your dad's?
Well, yes. One was this micromanaging part, as I mentioned. My father and I don't differ in many ways and sense. I've only just, I would say, been a little bit more ambitious in wanting to, grow to, other markets and vaccines and technologies, and he's always backed me on it. There've always been debates, even during COVID, how much should we make or invest or do. He's always then let me do whatever I've wanted, with a bit of convincing and faith that he's always had. He was always very happy with the vaccines that we were making at that time, but I always felt
you could do
with
more.
competition and to do more, I said, well, what would be my contribution? Why can't we, do this? Why can't we do that? And that would take, time, clinical trials, money, a lot of other decisions in there. We'd have to recruit more people, buy more land. So, there were risks associated with that. And he always would caution that, don't try and be too big too fast. Don't take debt. Don't borrow money. If it wasn't for his guidance, I may have tried to grow too fast and then stumbled and
You were a
fall.
young man in a hurry.
Yes. Yeah. And, that guidance from him, which I didn't appreciate that much, I see the wisdom in it today. I see a lot of other groups and people, taking on debt, buying 20 companies and then regretting it. So although we have diversified in the finance business and one or two other areas, but in a small and very measured sense, nothing that can, break and shake the group in a sense, because that's very important.
I want to come to those diversifications in a moment, but I think a lot of people would want to know, what does money mean to you? Is it the driving force?
No, money for me, yes, of course, like everyone else, means you have a comfortable life. But more than that, money to me gives me the ability to bring about change address inequality with the social work that we're doing in our foundation, in our business. Because we have and we're comfortable financially, I have the freedom to offer, for example, our vaccines to the poorest nations at the lowest prices so that they can afford to take it. Money to me gives me is an instrument or the medium where I can do good. And because look, you can't take whatever amount of money you have up to heaven when you die. You can give something to your children, they'll have plenty. You've seen all the philanthropists today also looking at it that way. For me, I think if I can use my money to do good for humanity and address the inequalities that are there, that is all that I hope to achieve. Look, we don't have investors in Serum and public shareholders and others that we have to answer to. So
you never thought of going public?
No, because it would only make us more. It would make us chase quarterly earnings, and then I'd have to increase prices, and I'd have to make even more profit. And then what do you do with that ultimately?
Right.
How does that benefit humanity? So Serum is run with a very, very sort of focus on what can we do for humanity and saving people's lives. Now we've got a finance business which is supposed to make profit and grow, which it is doing. So that's not the way I want to run Serum. Serum is run in a very different way.
Talking about saving lives, I think one of the most significant vaccines that's going to roll out is HPV.
Yes.
And the reason that it's so significant is that it is perhaps the only cancer that is preventable, which is cervical cancer.
Yes.
And I think more than 90% or 99% of all cervical cancer cases are because of HPV. Now, the government is going to make this part of its universal immunization program. When are we looking at this rollout? Hopefully, has this gone into production? Where are we?
Yeah. We've already, in fact, there's the building right behind us here, which is going to make it. It's we've got a 50-60 million dose capacity, which is enough for India. And by the end of this year, we're expecting the government to roll it out. So we're very excited. This was delayed by 1 or 2 years because of COVID. All our facilities and everything was focused on that. So I'm very excited and looking forward to getting this vaccine out. And at the moment, it's for girls, but also for boys, to prevent other things, is something that we're looking at. We're approved for it. So first we'll roll it out for the girls between the ages of 9 to 12 and 9 to 14.
I think,
And, technically any girl or any woman can take it even up to a later age. So I think this will make a huge difference to India. India has never had a vaccine made in India, for this. So hopefully by the end of this year.
It's really a very, very significant vaccine. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the other big vaccines that are in the pipeline. Dengue, I know. Malaria came last year. Pneumonia. I think. Tell us a little bit about what are the next big things that are on your mind.
No, so with climate change and with economic development, what's happening is that you have a shift in the breeding patterns of mosquitoes. You see, when you have a lot of construction and economic development, especially in this part of the world, India, Asia, and all of that, you have construction sites, potholes, water bodies, which normally wouldn't have been there. So you see a lot of mosquito-borne diseases coming about in these areas. Dengue, chikungunya, yellow fever. If you're going to Africa, yellow fever, you don't have it. So we've got these vaccines coming out. Malaria, we've already launched for Africa. So dengue in 2-3 years' time, chikungunya also in about 2 years' time, yellow fever next year. So I really I hate mosquitoes, and I felt that this is something that, and as you know, mosquitoes are the single largest killers of human beings as an animal, as a species. There's no animal on the planet that takes more human lives than mosquitoes.
I didn't know that.
A little trivial detail there, but with all these diseases combined. So that's one. We've got these pneumonia vaccines, flu vaccines, and other respiratory type vaccines that were coming about also for both children and the elderly. So it's just getting all these vaccines out there, completing their trials and license. That's the plan for the next 5 years.
Amazing. But in the meantime, you have entered this completely new space of content. Almost a bit of my world with your partnership with Karan Johar. What made you do it?
Well, he's been an old friend of mine for 15, 20
Yeah.
years. And that's where I got to know him and connect with him. And that's why we're quite well aligned. So it was very easy for us to partner. It's not easy to just partner with anyone, especially if it's a 50-50
Sure.
kind of relationship. The reason I did it was because I just felt that our ability to tell stories, what's happening in our nation, showing that to the world, even bringing about certain things that to light that would have been missed. He's very good at doing that.
Yeah.
Um, uh, he's told a lot of emotional stories, as you can tell from his movies on family, on romance, on other issues. It's also a soft power in a sense.
Yeah.
It gives you access and connects you to people that you wouldn't normally come across.
But was it a personal decision for you or a business decision?
I mean, it's personal and business. Now, how we can, utilize that to benefit our group also to
Yeah.
take that forward, or just, tell the nation stories to the world. I think it's a very interesting space. And don't forget, today we're very underpenetrated in a sense in terms of our screens. If you look at what's happening with our data, I wouldn't be surprised if people are going to start watching films on
I think it's
that
already
YouTube
happening. Yeah.
pay-per-view and other ways where the penetration in our country is only 10-15%.
I don't know the
20%.
future of halls, movie halls. I think that's
Yes,
the
so I'm
question.
talking screens.
Yeah.
So traditionally there was theater, then became OTT as well as a
Yeah.
combination, which
Yeah.
where we are today. I think it'll further penetrate, in the rural areas, in these areas, and that's where the business can also do well. I mean, Dharma does quite well. I mean, look, you can have a few years where you might not do so well. It's all about having the right budgets for the films. You don't overspend.
Spend.
And if you do that, then I think
But
you're
are,
okay.
are you hands-on with it, or you let Karan do most of the?
No.
sort of-
Karan is got his total creative freedom, and that was our understanding, and that's why the partnership also worked. That I wouldn't interfere in
Yeah.
that. Of course, if I have some inputs, I'm sure he'll be happy to listen. But we'll just try and make sure that we build these other verticals of distribution, having our music label and all that he's working on, and creating more and more content. I think, again, producing and increasing the production of content is also the name of the game. But we want to make good content. We just don't want to
Yeah.
mass produce.
I mean, you've got Martin Scorsese come on as EP on Homebound, and the clips look amazing. But what I want to ask you is, as a young man who grew up between India and England, what would you watch back then? Because there was no Netflix and there was no.
No, look, I mean, I was till the age of 10. I was in India,
Right.
and then I went to
Were
the
you allowed to
UK.
watch movies?
No, of course I
Yeah.
was. I wasn't allowed to watch every, but we all watched it.
Yeah.
No, I grew up on Amitabh Bachchan and that
Yeah.
generation of
Yeah.
movies, and then there was a period where I didn't watch a lot of Indian cinema, and then again over the last 5-6 years,
Yeah.
I've been, because of common friends, I've been watching a lot of their films and movies. I think I've enjoyed some of the romantic films, some of the action movies. I like some of the stories, like Alia Bhatt was in one, Gangubai, bringing to light, the issues that sex workers
Yeah.
go through
Yeah.
and the injustice they face. I liked films like Rocky Rani, which was a nice romantic
hoot.
movie.
Yeah.
Then there was the controversial film Animal, which a lot of people felt was a bit misogynistic
Yeah.
or whatever. But I just felt it brought about a lot of issues of Indian families, a father-son relationship in business or
Yeah.
even, the other dynamics at play.
Yeah.
So there were these sort of films that I enjoy watching. So maybe we'll make some more like that. And
It's a very different space from your core business. Are
Yes.
vaccines going to remain the core business?
yes, absolutely. I think in our group, if you look at it, 70% of my time and the revenues are coming from the vaccine business. Now you've got finance, real estate, and hotels,
Yeah.
which takes a small part of the balance. So we'll grow that. We're going for a capital raise in our finance company because that needs capital to grow. Do that at the end of this year. We sold off our stake in the insurance and other businesses which are not correlated because I want to again focus capital on our finance business and on Serum. So that's where I don't want to get too diluted and diversified.
Yeah. Talking about vaccines, I mean, we spoke briefly about Trump and Mr. Kennedy, but there is an age of misinformation, disinformation when it comes to vaccines. You only have to look at X, which used to be Twitter, to see it. It's a very voluble anti-vaxxer, I don't know, cabal, for lack of a better word. How do you counter that? Because, for example, you'll have a lot of
very
loose talk.
difficult.
A lot of loose talk. Is there a connection between vaccines and heart attacks, or vaccines are doing this? And there's so much of it. There's so much noise around it. How do you deal with that?
No, unfortunately, during the pandemic, social media and everything else that was going on didn't help because that really created a lot of anti.
And fear mongering.
Yes. So now, over time, again, we have to slowly educate people, show them data, explain to them, show them what was happening. And I'll tell you what's happening automatically. Now, you see these measles cases, for instance, coming up in the US and other parts of the world. This clearly is showing and demonstrating the power of good the vaccines were doing. Diseases that were virtually eradicated in certain countries. When you reduce the vaccination rates, you see these diseases come back. So, it's showing that data and having trusted people that, the public trust who can speak on it, talk about it and, be more transparent in terms of what can happen and can't happen in terms of safety. And it's a very difficult challenge, but, this is something which will never end. It'll
be an ongoing sort of eternal quarrel.
Yeah.
In terms of vaccine pricing, I know this has been, a pain point for you in the Indian context.
Yes.
Explain that to people because, when people look at a Serum Institute or they look at the pharma sector in general, there's a kind of stereotype that, these guys are just out to make big bucks.
Yeah.
But actually, when you break down the data, the vaccines, the prices at which vaccines are available in our country are amongst the cheapest in the world.
No, absolutely. This is a very important point. Now, see, there was that controversy even during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Should it be 200 rupees, 300 rupees, 400 rupees? If you really look at where people are spending money today, on consumer goods, on beauty, on clothes, on buying cars, phones, bikes, whatever it is, paying 400-500 rupees as opposed to say 200 rupees is not a significant increase. Now, what was the logic here? And even today, there's this battle where there's price capping, controlled by the government. Look, if you want a Pfizer, GSK, or a large company which can innovate, create, and make in India, instead of us just having to partner with the foreign institutes that create these molecules, you need this industry to thrive. Look at the IT or the auto industry, for example. The average IT auto company, or they're making $1 billion of profits per quarter. Our turnover, despite being the largest in the world, is just $1 billion.
And how does that compare to international?
So a Pfizer or GSK is 100 times that, 50 times that. So now, if I want to spend $400-500 million to create a new molecule to, for a vaccine for TB or something like that, where do I get the money? My profit is some 150, 200, $300 million. That's not enough for even one product. Now, for example, our malaria vaccine we funded, over 5 years and managed that way to go through the clinical trials, spend on the capex and all of that. And you look at even our pharmaceutical companies in India, we're 1/10 the size of the larger ones. Now, partly that's due to our ability to be able to innovate and create. Now, India has the best talent, hardworking people. Our costs in all other infrastructure are quite low. All we need is the ability to price our products in a way which is fair
Yeah.
make enough profits so that it can be replowed. Now, what are we going to do with the profits? I can't take it out or take it up to heaven. What am I going to do? I'm going to make more vaccines
That's
with it.
right.
So when people say, "Okay, oh, you're going to make more money," what am I going to do with it? With that profits, I'm making new vaccines to protect you only. No, what am I going to do with it?
So have you had any luck
So,
convincing
we have to
regulators of this?
educate and look. If we are to have an even-handed kind of thing from the government's point of view,
Yeah.
what is the government's job? The mandate is to protect the people from unfair pricing and exploitation.
Yeah.
I'm fully on board with that. I'm the poster boy for that. I've reduced prices of vaccines globally for the last 10, 20 years, and my father has been doing it for 60 years. So, what am I saying? A fair pricing model where every day we're given notices to reduce our prices, in fact. So, on one side, if we want to make in India and create in India and innovate in India, how do we do that? So, there has to be a fair pricing sort of arrangement done where the government is protecting the people's interests, where the common man is not being exploited, and the companies and businesses can grow, create more employment, more innovation, and all of that. So, this balance needs to be looked at, and this is where we'll have to engage with the government also to do that. And I'm sure they'll come with a reasonable balance on that.
Now, COVID was your big punt, but if you have like a kind of unfinished dream, and I don't mean the sort of vaccines that you've already chronicled that you're working on. What's like is there like a part of you
the ultimate dream is to have, at whatever cost and effort, a vaccine to prevent TB and HIV. These are the two big ones where there's been no solution to. I mean, look, cancer, yes, ideally, but I don't know if a vaccine can help with other types of cancers and treatments. But I think TB and HIV, if there could be a good, effective vaccine for that, that is really the ultimate dream. I don't know if in my lifetime it'll happen. Maybe my children, if they take over and can manage all this, maybe in their lifetime. So let's see.
Will the children take over?
Well, I hope so. My older one already comes here, and
oh really?
He's understanding slowly, like I used to as a teenager.
He's 15.
He's 15. So whenever in his holidays he gets time away from just mugging, which is what's happening in the schools everywhere. I try and expose him to the realities of life. But I think what they go through in their educational phase is very important also, their interaction and social skills that develops, at that age. And, probably in his early 20s, like I started, he'll probably get into working here. And,
is there a dream outside of the vaccine universe?
Well, I mean, look, he has the freedom to do whatever else he wants. I mean, I'd be happy if he wants to. And he's got certain entrepreneurial aspirations to do things in AI and some other stuff. Let's see, maybe we can help him with that. But ultimately, look, I mean, I'm not going to retire at least for 20 years. So they've got 20 years to figure out what they want to do, and hopefully they'll take over as well and continue this legacy.
Finally, what would you tell that 20-year self today? What did life teach you?
I think I probably would tell my 20-year-old self not to have done a few of the other things that I wanted to experiment with and do, which only distracted and delayed me from my ultimate goal and focus. But, it's very hard to say that in hindsight, because your perspective on life when you're much younger, you want to prove yourself, you want to do certain other things that you think will definitely work.
Like?
There were so many things, other businesses that you tried to start or do or whatever.
Right.
So there are these small sort of setbacks or failures, but I think that teaches you also. So I don't have regrets on that.
Is there anything you regret?
No, it's tough to say, isn't it? Because at that time, your perspective is different.
Right.
Some people get married later. Earlier, I got married when I was 26. I think that was, some people would say, why did you get married too early? But I chose to get married because I wanted to have my family and get that part sort of settled and out of the way. So I don't regret that, certainly, because I wouldn't have, my children, my wife, all that, what I have today. No, it's tough to say. I don't regret anything. Maybe I would have taken a few different calls and decisions. But again, as I said, it's perspective, is what you know at that time. So going back in time today with what I know is impossible to have
So let's go
thought
forward.
of at
Let's
that
go
time.
forward in time before we close this conversation. You said at least another 20 years. I would say more. But if 20 years later I come here and we have this conversation again, and let's say you've got your TB and your HIV vaccine by then, what do you, because the world's going to change really quickly. AI is going to change how we make medicines. So much is going to change. Like, we literally have no idea what's coming. Where do you see your life 20 years from now?
Oh, hopefully I'm retired and I
Oh.
can look at, my social work
Yeah.
and focus on, things related to climate change and my other social work that I'm doing.
Which I learned today that you're doing a lot of work in the city of Pune to actually clean
Yeah,
up
we've
the
been
city.
doing that for
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
We've got 450 trucks and machines which
Yeah.
pick up the waste. There's even an app where, if you take a photo of some garbage lying around, they'll come and pick it up. So it's, that's one area. And we've got our schools, charitable hospital. We're trying to do as much as we can for orphans, where we are housing and taking care of their living. I'd much rather have my children take over my business and do all of that.
So when you have all
at
this free
some
time,
point.
what is it that you want to do with it?
No, as I said, I enjoy traveling.
Yeah.
Doing my social work, going on holidays. I'd love to be able to spend more time doing that, but right now that's difficult given all the things that we want to get done right now.
Well, I'll just say that again, that you were a real hero of the COVID sort of phase. And all of this, to think that an HPV vaccine is going to roll out and, also, as you mentioned, work in the tuberculosis and HIV space. This is also significant. It's a real legacy. Thank you so much, Adar.
Pleasure
Pleasure
talking to you.